Tov, Baruch Hashem. Today's Daf Yomi is Shevuos Mem Ches, Shevuos 48. We're going to start on the bottom of 47b, 8 lines from the bottom. Today's Daf is dedicated for Shmir for the Chayalim, that's all for the Shuyim, and a Yeshua for Am Yisrael on this 8th Torah. The Gemara introduces a topic which will relate back to the sugya that we're discussing in our Mishnah. So Itmar Shteki Te'edim Amachishos, that two witnesses, two groups of witnesses, two sets of witnesses. Each group has two people in it, and they give mutually exclusive testimony. So they're contradicting each other, and they both can't be right. So Amar Rafuna, so Rafuna says in this context, Zuba b'fnei atzmo meida, v'zuba b'fnei atzmo meida. Even though one of them is obviously lying, we're nevertheless going to say that both of them are still going to be kosher witnesses. They're not disqualified, and they can testify in another matter. Whereas Rav Chisda Amar Bahade Saadi Shakri Lamali. Obviously, one of these groups are lying. So since there's a very good chance that one of the groups is a liar, whereas the other one is kosher, therefore we're not going to allow either one to be the witnesses. Bahade Saadi Shakri Lamali. So neither one can testify. So now the Gemara applies it. Shnei Malvin, Ushnei Loben. Let's say you have two lenders and two borrowers, Ushnei Shtaros. Well, if you have two separate loans with two separate borrowers with two separate notes, well, that is the exact case. Hainu Putayo. That's the exact dispute between Rav Huna and Rav Chisda. Malvev Velovel Ushnei Shtaros. But let's say you have one lender, one borrower, and you have two notes upon him. Meaning to say he produces the two notes at the same time, and one with one set of witnesses, the other with the other. Then Yad Baal Ashtar al Tachtona. Then he, even according to Rav Chisda, who says that one of them is false, one of them is also for sure true. So you could collect the testimony, but you can only collect it from can collect on the note, but only from the lower note, not from the greater amount of money. Shnei Malvin Velova Echad with Shnei Shtaros. Let's say you have two different lenders. But one borrower, meaning the borrower is getting hit from both directions, that each lender produces a note with different witnesses. So with each of the different witnesses, a and that's the case in our Mishnah, where we had this case where the shopkeeper says, I paid your workers, and the workers say we weren't paid, and the employer has to pay back both of them. But let's say we have two borrowers and one lender, and two different notes, meaning to say the lender is trying to use each of the groups of witnesses to collect from a different borrower. So he's basically trying to get it from both directions and to collect it. So what's the answer there? Teku. The Gemara says we leave that question unresolved. So Masar Rav Huna bar Yehuda, so we're on top of 48a. Rav Huna bar Yehuda says, well, let's challenge this last position. Let's challenge the position of Rav Chisda, who says that if there are two contradictory witnesses, that you can't use them, because we have, when it comes to the sanctification of the new moon, so one person says the height of marda is like a strap to smack a donkey, so that was a measure of height. So one says he saw the moon, it was in the sky, beis mardos in the sky, and the other one says 3. So then under those circumstances, it's not a significant distinction. So Edus and Kayamas, your testimony is valid. But Echad Omer Gimel, Echad Omer Hey, but if one says it was 3 and the other one says it was 5 in the air, Edus and Betela. So then they're contradicting, and their witnesses cancel each other out. But we allow them to combine to other testimony. So this is against Rav Chisda. So aren't we saying we're going to allow them to combine to be kosher witnesses in another area in a monetary case? And isn't this against Rav Chisda? So the Gemara says, no, Amarava means much more simple. Much more simple. It just means, simply speaking, that if another witness shows up and combines with one of them, then now there's two witnesses. So it's 2 against 1, and that is no longer contradictory witnesses. Those are witnesses who carry the day. because it's two against one. And we negate the one. So even though he was initially a contradictory witness, but then if a third person shows up and he joins with them, that nullifies him. Okay, so now we had said in our Mishnah, Amar Lechamvani Teli Bedinar Peros. He says to the shopkeeper, give me my Peros, and give me dinar. He says, give me produce for my dinar. And then what does the shopkeeper say? The shopkeeper gives him the produce and he says, give me that dinar. So he says, I gave it to you and you put it away. So then the customer has to swear that he gave him the dinar and then he can walk away. But let's say he says, give me the peros, and he says, I gave him to you and you took him home. Then the shopkeeper takes an oath. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol shaperos biyado yado yono. Whoever has the produce, he has the upper hand. And so Gemara says, we're on 48a, 5 lines from the top. Tanya Amar Rabbi Yehuda, when is this the case that whoever has the peros has the upper hand? That's only when he actually has the bisman. So then we're going to say, so it says Rabbi Yehuda, he must say, when do I admit to the Chachamim that the customer needs to take an oath? That's only Bisman Shaperes Tziburin Umunachan Ushnein Orin Alain. That's only when they're placed there on the ground and they're in a pile and both of them are arguing over who gets that. Then the Baal Bayis needs to take an oath in order to take them. But if you put them in his basket and he's already taking them home, and then the burden of proof rests upon the shopkeeper. And so therefore, even if the Baal Bayis will not take an oath, then he still needs to bring a proof in order to get it, basically, because it's a much higher burden of proof. And we have the same case seemingly, and it has to do with a money changer. So why do we have the same exact scenario, but instead of fruit and a coin, we have a person who's giving money to change his money? So why do we need both cases? So the Gemara says, we need both cases, because if you just had the first case where he says, give me my produce, then we would say that the Chacham's position is that the customer needs to take an oath in order to take his produce. And Rabbi Yehuda says he could take him without an oath. That's Bahach Kamei Rabbanan. That's where the Rabbanan say that he needs to take an oath. Mishum de Peri Avidi de Merkaveh, because the fruit, typically speaking, would rot. Because since they're going to go bad, the shopkeeper is not going to keep them, and he's going to quickly put them into the utensils of the Baal Bayis. And so then there's more likelihood for the claim that he didn't get his money, and the Baal Bayis needs to take an oath in order to take his produce, even though they're in his possession already. Of almost or Merkaveh, but as it relates to money, well, there it's not a rush to pack them up, so they don't rot. So Rabbi Yehuda, maybe the Rabbanan would agree with Rabbi Yehuda that he doesn't need to take an oath. And if you only had the case of the money, then we would say, that's what Rabbi Yehuda says is law, because money doesn't rot. But maybe in the case of the fruits, he would agree with the rabbis. We have this teaching. And now we take just like we said, if a woman's ksuva is pogemes, means if she collected part of it, she can only collect the rest if she takes an oath. And so too, the orphans cannot collect unless they take an oath. So what is that talking about? This is the case we had yesterday. Miman, who are the orphans wanting to collect from? Milova, if you want to say the orphans want to collect from somebody who their father lent money to, from a borrower, their father was able to take the money without an oath, and they need to take an oath. It's not logical to say that, because normally we're more lenient on the orphans, not less lenient. So this is what it means. If orphans want to collect from other orphans, they can only collect it if they take an oath. And Rav Shmuel said this law on that. Now we're going to discuss this teaching of Rav Shmuel basically for a good chunk of the daf. Rav Shmuel said, when do we say that the orphans have to take an oath to collect from the other orphans? That's only if their father that their father had died while the borrower was still alive, and so then they come and collect from the borrower. And now that the borrower dies, then they have to take an oath to collect from the orphans. But the borrower himself died first, and so therefore their father would have only been able to collect from orphans via an oath. Then and their father, the lender, was already obligated to take an oath to the borrower's children. The ain adam morish shvul of, and this is the chiddush of Rav and Shmuel. Person cannot bequeath the oath to his children, and so therefore the children wouldn't be able to collect under those circumstances because they can't take an oath. So how could they take an oath that this wasn't paid yet? That was their father, and so therefore that's the chiddush of Rav and Shmuel. So Shalchul Kamei to Rabbi Elazar, they sent the teaching of Rav and Shmuel to Rabbi Elazar. Shevuos mativa. Do you agree with this oath that Rav and Shmuel say that he can't take this oath, and so therefore they orphans can't collect under those circumstances. So, by the way, I just want to point out that orphans doesn't mean like little children, like little Annie. It could be just heirs. It's sometimes Yisomim who are ketanim, but here it's just the heirs. So Shachul Kamei Rabbi Elazar Shevuos Mativa. What's the nature? Shachul Yorshin Nishpan Shevuos Yorshin V'Notlin. So he says the heirs take an oath, and this is a different oath. They take an oath, not that they take an oath that's called the Shevuos Yorshin, and which is what they always have to take. And what's this case? What is this case of the Shevuos Yorshin? It's basically an oath that our father didn't tell us that he already paid it, and they don't have any knowledge of that. Rashi says, Abba, our father didn't tell us he paid it, and then we get to take it. So he says, yeah, they could take an oath and they could collect it. He doesn't agree with Rav and Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel says they can't take an oath, and he says they can't take an oath, and then they take it. So it says the Gemara. So it says the Gemara. Shachua b'mei Rabbi Ami. So again, they had this discussion. Days of Rabbi Ami. Amar kulei hai shachua. You keep sending me this v'azli, and you keep sending to me and basically going and discussing it. So the point is, he says, did I skip anything? If I had an explanation for the position of if I had an explanation for this position of Rav and Shmuel, then of course I would have told you. Elam Rabbi Ami, so therefore Rabbi Ami says, Hova Asa, says Rabbi Ami, Hova Asa Yadan, name about Melsa. I'll tell you something. Since you keep asking me about Rav and Shmuel's din, I'll say something to you. Meaning to say, at first he's saying I don't agree with Rav and Shmuel, but because I don't know the reasoning for it, but he's not challenging it completely. So he says, if I know a law for it, I'll send it to you. So, but what I'll say is the following: Amar Bedin Umeis. Let's say the lender had actually taken the borrower's heirs to court, and then he died. Then he's already been technically obligated because he took them to the court. And so then, so in the case where the court proceedings had started, then we'll say he can't bequeath it to his children. But if he didn't actually take them to court and he died, well, then Yorshin Yishpa and Shevuos Yorshin. Then they could take an oath that their father never told us it was paid, and then they could collect the money. So Malzkev Rav Nachman, what he says, what are you talking about? The court is not the one that's creating this oath. The second the borrower died, the lender has this obligation of an oath. So your distinction is not accepted by me. Elam Rav Nachman, so it says Rav Nachman, Iso the Rav Shmuel. If you want to say Iso the Rav Shmuel, Isa Leisa Leisa. He says, if we accept Rav and Shmuel's position, we accept it. If we don't accept it, we don't accept it. Like don't play games. It's if you go to court or not. So the Gemara says, Amar Mesavko. So you see, Rav Nachman himself wasn't sure. Is that really the case? So Amar Rav Yosef Amar Yumi, Abed Rav Nachman Uvda, Yachoku. So didn't Rav Nachman actually rule in this case that you split it? And so in a case where both of them are suspected, because he says neither one can take an oath. So we see from here he doesn't agree with Rav and Shmuel, because Rav and Shmuel says in a case where you can't take an oath, you don't pay. But we see that Rav Nachman says you split it where they can't take an oath. So he doesn't agree with Rav and Shmuel. So he says no. With Dvarav de Rabbi Meir Ka'amar V'Leilo Sfirle. So he says as follows, meaning to say, according to Rabbi, he says that would be only according to the position of Rabbi Meir, and or some say Rabbi Ami, but different girsa, but he doesn't agree with him. That was the position of Rabbi Meir, who says in our Mishnah, Rabbi Meir says Yachoku, but he doesn't agree with that position, and so therefore he wasn't sure, and so therefore he wouldn't agree with. Rav Nachman himself held like Rabbi Yossi. A little bit confusing because our Mishnah first said Rabbi Yossi said Chazra Shvuos Koma, and then he said Yachoku. So he held like the position of Rabbi Yossi that says Chazra Shvuos Koma, and that goes back to its. Well, it's a little bit confusing, but Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah says it goes back, but then he says, when he says split it means according to the position of Rabbi Meir, but he doesn't hold like that. Meaning to say that's only according to the position of Rabbi Meir. So he says then Rabbi Meir says in our Mishnah that both of them go back to its place. And about that, Rav and Shmuel says that as a result of that, the one who makes the claim can't do anything. But Rabbi Abba explained that he has to pay. So Rav Nachman wasn't sure if Rav and Shmuel's position is correct in the explanation of Rabbi Meir. That's what he's saying. I'm not sure if his explanation is correct in the explanation, if their position is correct in the explanation of Rabbi Meir. But Rav Nachman himself held like Rabbi Yossi that you split it, and so therefore that's how he ruled. So when you say he wasn't sure of whether or not he wasn't sure, basically, if they're correct in their explanation of Rabbi Meir. But he himself held like Rabbi Yossi that it's split. But it means to say whether they're correct or Rabbi Abba is correct. That's all we're saying. So the Gemara says, Masav Rav Oshaya, so Rav Oshaya challenges this. Rav Oshaya challenges the position of Rav and Shmuel that a person does not leave. The Gemara is going to bring 4 challenges. That a person does not bequeath the oath to his heirs. So here's the first, Mesa. Now, when she dies, Yorsha Maskirin as Ksuvasa Ad Esrei Mechamesh Shanim. A woman who dies, she has 25 years to collect her ksuba. So if she didn't collect it, her heirs can come in, they collect her ksuba until 25 years. And we see, how do they collect it? They have to take an oath. And so how are they able to do that? So and obviously she's collecting there from the heirs of the husband because it's a case of death. And so they're able to collect it. So how are they able to collect it? It must be that they're able to take this oath. So that's a question on Rav and Shmuel. So the Gemara says no. Yeah, if she dies before, there's no ksuba. She only collects, so fine. So the Gemara says, no. She took the oath that she never collected, and then she died. And now the heirs want to collect. Second attempt. Tashma Nasa Rishon, a man married a woman, Umesa. And then after that, she died. Nasa Shnia Omes, and then he married a second woman, and he died. Then we say Mesu Shnia v'Yorshea Kodmel Yorshea Rishona, that the second woman is and her heirs come before the first woman's heirs. So we see, and clearly they're coming to take an oath about what was collected. Meaning to say, first the second one collects her ksuva, and then the first heirs come along and say what's remaining. And so since the the heirs of the father have to pay his debts, and they have to pay the ksuva. So we see that they're paying it. Nevertheless, we see from here that if the second woman dies, her heirs could collect. So it's a complete, it's completely against Rav and Shmuel. So the Gemara says, no, it's the same idea that she took the oath first and then she died. A third attempt. So the third case is, it relates to a woman who admits that she already collected part of a ksuva, and so she needs to take an oath that she didn't collect the whole thing. But when her husband, but when her husband married her, he wrote that that she could collect the ksuva without taking an oath. But her heirs have to take the oath. But his heirs can make her heirs take an oath, and anyone who comes, meaning she's exempt, but her heirs have to take the oath. So we see from here that again she could bequeath the oath to the heirs. So Amar Rav Shmaya, what's the other Ketani? You have to read the Mishnah like this: Osa ba'almana v'yarsha bigrusha, meaning to say when it says that they make her take the oath, that's by a widow, but her heirs is where she was divorced, and so therefore, since it's the case when she was divorced, then the husband owed her the ksuva without an oath, because he promised her, and so then she died, and she left to her offering this money that she doesn't need to swear about. And so saying that if afterwards the husband and they want to collect it, they need to take an oath from the heirs. And even though he wrote that he wouldn't make her take an oath, that's only when he himself would not make her take an oath. But his heirs are allowed to swear it. So we don't learn anything from this case. The fourth case is Masav Rav Nassim bar Shaya. You say Yafa koach haben mikoach av. That under certain circumstances, the offspring has more strength than the father. Shab, top of 48b. Shab ben gova ben b'shvua ben shelo b'shvua. That the son can collect sometimes with an oath or even without an oath. So as we're about to explain, the ha'av ain't a gova el b'shvua, whereas the father only collects it with an oath. So what does this mean? Hechidami. What's the scenario? So if the borrower dies, the scenario is where the borrower dies while the lender was still alive. The that the son can collect under those circumstances even without an oath. Bishvua, what does it mean that he has to take an oath? That's Shevuos Yorshin. That's the regular standard oath that every heir has to say that his father didn't tell him not to collect this. And Shelo Bishvua, and when it says he could collect it without an oath, isn't that like the position of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel in our Mishnah, that if there are witnesses that said that the father said it's not paid, then they could collect it without an oath. But nevertheless, we see from here that they can collect it. And now, like Rav and Shmuel will say, they can't collect it. So Amar Rav Yosef, Hamani, no, this is only the position of Beis Shammai. It's like it's already collected. That's why, therefore, they could collect it without an oath. But we don't paskin like that. So Ikor Rav Nachman Asura, Ol Gabe Rav Chisda, the Rav Bar Rav Huna. So Rav Nachman came to Surah. So Rav Chisda, Rav Bar Rav Huna came to him, and they say, Amar Leisei Mar. So we have a bezdin here. Let's uproot this teaching of Rav and Shmuel that where they can't take an oath, and that you can't bequeath an oath to your children. You think I came all this way to uproot Rav and Shmuel's din? No way. I'll tell you what we'll do. Let's just we can't uproot it, but let's just limit it. How so? Could go my. Damar Papa. So maybe he wants to limit in the following case. Or Papa says that Pogim Eshtaro, somebody who says basically a portion of his note was already paid. umeis, and then he dies. Yorshin Ishban Shevuos Yorshin, Benotlan, that they can take the rest. They take an oath that this was the only part that was paid, and take the rest. So in that case, so that's not the oath that Rav and Shmuel were saying their law. But this was a case, a different type of an oath, a pogim shtara. So there we don't say that they can't take an oath. In that case, they could take the oath. So Ahuda Shachav Shavik Arba, there was a guy who died and he left behind a guarantor. So that they could take the oath and collect from the guarantor. Mara says, no, the guarantor against the orphans. No, that's like a case of collecting straight from the orphans. Because the guarantor, once he pays, he goes to the orphans to collect. This time a guy died, he didn't live behind orphans, but he left behind the brother. So let's also not apply Rav Shmuel's teaching here, because it's not exactly the same case. It's not orphans, it's a brother. You know, it's the same. It's the same principle. It's the same thing. Okay, so so now we have a very important principle. It says, now that we have now learned that the law is not like Rav and Shmuel, not like Rabbi Elazar, this judge, this judge who rules like Rav and Shmuel that you can't collect, he did it properly. And the Avik Rabbi Elazar Avad. And the one who rules like Rabbi Elazar also did it properly. We see from here that under certain circumstances, halacha is not objective. It's not like there's an objective truth. Either way, you can rule and it'll be okay. Either way, you can rule and be okay. The law allows for either ruling. Yeah, something like that in American law. The law allows for either ruling. I can rule for the lender, I can rule for the borrower, and both will be okay.
Well, it's a question of what's the precedent. Right?
But there's precedent in both ways. You could adopt either one.
Well, so what you're saying here, in that case,
no, but it's not what he's saying. He's saying you don't have to. You could rule. Yeah, he says if he rules like Rebbe Lazar, who says in the exact case I don't like him, that's okay. So that's what he says. I'm Rav Papa. I started. He asked me. Well, mikra. That's what Rav Papa says. If you have a note on orphans, or mikra karinan, right? Don't tear it up. Below agbuye magbinan bay, and don't collect from it. Don't agree. You know, they don't collect from it. They'll must like Rav Shmuel. Maybe he'll like Rav Shmuel. Mikra will karina way, but we don't tear it up. Dayana Davik Rabbi Lazar, because he passes like Rabbi Lazar, it's also sufficient. Ahu Dayana Davik Rabbi Lazar. There was a judge who ruled like Rabbi Lazar. There was a Torah scholar in the city. On my way, I seen a guard to me. Marava the way like Rabbi Lazar. I'll bring you a note. The law is not like Rabbi Lazar. On my way, Lachli Taisi, go bring it to me. Also coming to Rav Chama. He went to Rav Chama. On my way, Rav Chama says, hi, Diana, Davik Rebbe Lazar of it. Yeah, he passed him like Rebbe Lazar. You can pass him like Rav Shmuel, or you can pass like Rebbe Lazar and collect it. So you can rule either way. So you have to see. Yeah, you have conflicting rules. You have conflicting rulings. You could adopt either one.
Yeah, so it's like, let's say let's just report. Other courts of not A, other courts of not B. It's never been decided whether it's A or B.
Right, that's what I'm saying. You could apply either one. Even though in this case it was decided. You're allowed to rule either way. These are people you can take an oath. We make them take an oath even without a claim. And the partners and the sharecroppers. What do you mean? You make them take an oath even without a claim? The Mishnah were talking about fools that they take an oath even though nobody made a claim against them. So the Gemara says, even though you don't have a claim of certainty, you only have a claim of possibility against them. you could still make maybe you weren't honest in the way you broke up the partnership. Maybe you weren't honest with your sharecropping. Then you could still take them. Normally, in order for someone to take an oath, you need a certain claim. But here, even though it's ambiguous claim, it's still sufficient. Kana ben Bayis Shamro, that when they said that a person who's a ben Bayis, you can make him take an oath. It's not that he actually comes into your house, and then you can make him take an oath with a taina shema. No, it means that he's like your contractor. He's always bringing in workers and fruit or produce, and so therefore you can make him take this claim. So why in all these cases do you make these people take an oath on a claim of shema? Because all these people are so familiar and they're doing work for you, they're more likely to rule leniently on themselves, by themselves, in their own favor, and help themselves to lunch, so to speak. So Amrav Yosef Bar Menyumi, Amrav Nachman, this takes us back to the very beginning of this section of the Gemara, back on 10 days ago, where he says as long as this Machokas Rav and Shmuel says that at least the claim has to be of 2 kesef. That's like Shmuel. Come on, because Shmuel says that you don't need to have the kfira, the denial of 2 kesef, but you just need a claim of 2 kesef. But Atani Rebbe Chiyah Rav, but didn't Rebbe Chiyah cite a brisa in support of Rav? So Ema kfira steinak Rav. Okay, so maybe the rejection has to be 2 like Rav. So then it said that once the cholko ashutfin va'arisin, once the partners and the sharecroppers had split up already, then you can't make him take an oath. But if he has nisgalgu shul mimakom acher, then once you have to take one of those parties an oath from something else, then you have to make him take an oath on this. So our Mishnah is saying that only up until the division can he make him, the other partner, take an oath. But after the division, he can't make him take an oath unless there's a gilgul shvuos from something else. So the Gemara says, can you make him take this gilgul shvua, this basically, once you have to take an oath in another area, you make him take an oath in this area, can you make him take this oath even though he was, let's say, only rabbinically liable to take an oath? Like, let's say he has to take a shvuas heses from another direction. Can then you then apply the gilgul shvua, tashma? So lava menu. So let's say the borrower borrowed from his friend on the eve of Shevuos. Umotzi Shvius not so a shutuf o aros, and then after Shvius he became a partner. Aim the goglin, then the lender is not able to make him take the oath, because even if he really did lend him, the Shemitah would cancel it. Taima the loving menu erev Shvius. So we see from here that that's only because the loan was canceled because of the Shemitah year. That's a Shvius afkate. Because Shmias canceled it. Hashar Shnei Shavua, but it was all the other years Megaglin. And even though it was a rabbinic oath, you can make him take an oath. The Gemara says no. Don't say that. Ela ema naso shutafo aros ereshvius or motzi shvius love menu Megaglin. No, means to say that if he became a partner on the eve of Shavuos, and then after Shavuos he borrowed from him, then he could do the Gilgul Shvua even on the partnership that was before Shvius. And the Chiddush is that even though Shvius cancels the oath, that's only from a loan, but not from a partnership. Mar says, but didn't we learn that explicitly? Didn't we have a brayso that said this explicitly? The Gemara says, Shema Mina, no, this brayso learns Megalgon b'derabanan, but yeah, and that, see this from the brayso that you can do this gilgul shvua even on rabbinic shmita, even on rabbinic oath. Amar Avuna, a kol megalgon. So for every obligation of an oath, you can be megalgon an additional oath. Chutz mi sachir she'ein megalgon, except for a worker who wants to take an oath that he did not get paid yet. That you can't do gilgul shvua, because really you would believe the worker without an oath, but we say you're just doing it in order to appease the mind of the employer. Of Chistamar Kol, he says, Ein makilin, chutz misachir de makilin. So Rav Chisda said a little differently. He said, on all the people who have to take an oath, we're not lenient, except on a worker who were lenient. My benai, what's the distinction? Ika benai liftocho. The distinction between them is whether or not, for all other cases, that we make the suggestion that you can do Gilgal Shua. According to Rav Huna, we do. The judges themselves say to the litigant that he could make him take an additional oath. Whereas Rav Chisda says, Makilin, says if he requests it, we allow it. But we don't suggest it on our own. And sabbatical year cancels the oath. When you say somebody who has to pay his friend an oath and the sabbatical year comes, he's exempt. Even words, the sabbatical year cancels, even in oath. And Baruch Hashem, we're up to now the last chapter. Shkoyach.